Hi, this is Kevin Sharp. I'm here today with Ryan Sook, artist on a secret, soon to be announced DC Comics project, to talk about a page by Art Adams.
How's it going, Kevin?
Good. So tell us what book you've chosen.
I chose the New Mutants as Guardian Wars, or X-Men as Guardian Wars, as it were, a miniseries that Art Adams drew back in the 80s sometime. My memory is not good enough to pinpoint it exactly. My memory actually just reaches to this page and this series, specifically because at the time, I was probably about 11 years old, I think, when I first saw this, and I was picking up all my books in like quarter bins and boxes at the flea market, and I got this thing. I'm going through the boxes like with my probably I had $1 to my name, and this was like striking gold at the flea market. And I chose this page in particular simply because these two drawings of magic as she's being converted from, or I should say, really, she's being cloned somewhat, or the spiritual form of her is being created by this sorceress. The drawing there is so burned and blazoned into my memory because when I saw this, I had never seen anything like that in a comic book before. Art Adams broke ground anyway for me, stylistically, and this series in general, the whole series. It was really hard to pick a page, obviously, but
Would you have seen Art's work before this at all?
the first comic that I ever bought from a comic book shop, because one had opened near my house. Everything prior to that was either flea market or 7-Eleven, spinner rack. But the first comic that I ever bought from a comic shop was Classic X-Men #1, strictly because of that Arthur Adams cover. And like seriously, my allowance was $1. So going to the comic shop was $1, and the comic was $1, which was way more than my regular budget. And I couldn't resist it. I had to spend my whole, the whole schmola on the Classic X-Men #1, and I got all those covers that he did. And I think I remember being home and disappointed that the interiors were not his. So when I found this at the flea market, the full project being done by Art, it's just one of those jobs. It's got tons of material in it that just remains, completely scorched into my memory. It's one of those things that, as a comics fan, I have held on to all this time.
So when you look at it now as a professional, tell us about what stands out to you on the page.
Well, first of all, just the drawing. Art, as a guy who just can draw and could draw, he had a style that was unique. He had a cartooning ability he still does. I shouldn't say did, but at the time, I'd never seen anybody draw like him. You could make comparisons to Michael Golden or different artists and stuff like that he was maybe influenced. Some of the stuff that Walt Simonson did, special effects wise. But just as a guy who had a style that was so standout and unique and set apart from what was going on in the mainstream of comics at that time, he immediately caught my attention. Most of the stuff that I was influenced by up until that point was not superhero comics. My dad collected heavy metals and illustration books and stuff like that. So I was more interested in like the studio artists and Bernie Wrightson and Mike Kaluta and Mobius and Richard Corbin, those kind of guys. Even as a kid, right? I probably shouldn't have been looking at that stuff, but but I was, and I loved it. And yet here was this American artist doing mainstream superhero comics that, to my mind, are still and were then comparable artistically. And this page is just a standout in an already standout series. Now, when I look at it as someone who tells a story for a living and the craft of it, having done all my study years since then to learn why something works and why it doesn't, if you look at this page real closely, you'll see Chris Claremont, who wrote this. And I actually have read a couple of Chris's scripts. They are novels in themselves. To read the script is a chore. And I'm sure this is no different. But when you look at the page, the information that he was able to get on that page what Art was able to bring across there was no small feat. Not to mention leaving room for all of the text, that heavy, heavy dialogue and expository dialogue that Chris was writing in these panels, and still be able to see the transformation of a tortured magic and the separation of her spirit being now trapped and tormented in this demonic version, which starts out demonic and then gets even more demonic, and it's just like, that's impressive. It's impressive to be able to bring that across on a a 7 panel page or so. Not to mention an oddly, unusually stacked panel page. But God, he really brought it across, and that's hard to do as a storyteller. And maintain the ability to provide such detail, such inventive design and creativity to these things. Look at the chainmail on that second version of Magic's suit. Now that I actually copied that figure and drew it several times, redrew it several times, trying to learn why it was so amazing and why it worked so well. And I always liked that shot with her real heavy, sharp cheekbones angling down with those shadows to her narrow chin there. And he did that a lot with Spiral he was drawing at the time and everything, and just unique, classic, and beautiful, beautiful piece of work.
Great. Thank you, Ryan, for joining us.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.